I always try to make things, I try to simplify things because that's how my brain, I can't overcomplicate things or I'm going to burn the root. So let's think of this practically, functionally, and lean into our bodies that know the physics. Bodies know a lot of physics. What this graph is saying is that if I had only the mass of my arm, this is a weight, the gravity pulling down on the mass. If all I had was the mass of my lower arm to move, I can move it as fast as possible. This is as fast as I can have elbow flexion when I have the least amount of load to move. If I put 5-pound dumbbell in my elbow, I can still move it fast, but it's going to be a little bit slower with that added load. And if I replace the 5 with 10, it's going to be a little slower. 15, a little slower. I'm still giving it my all. I'm still trying to move it fast. I replace the 15 with 30 pounds, and I'm trying to move it as fast as I can. 50 pounds. You see what I'm saying? In other words, the lighter the load, the faster we can move things. So that's what this graph means. On the x-axis is how fast can you potentially move something? And the y-axis is how much load are you moving? And if you notice, as the load goes up, the velocity comes down. This is 0. You can't move a heavy load fast. You can move a light load fast. And you can move heavy things slow. It's just per unit. I can't do a max bench as fast as possible. It just makes sense. The more weight you add, the slower you're going to do it. So the first thing I want to show you when I get into levers of what exactly you're going to need to know for the test is this conflict of interest between speed and load and force. If you're moving heavy things, it has to be done slow. And the only way you can really make something go fast is if it's not heavily loaded. So in other words, if you're sprinting, all you got to move is your mass. It's not like you're running with 50-pound dumbbells. You just have to move you. And then the second thing I want to bring up is power. Power, optimal power. How much time does it take for you to do work? Optimal power lives between speed and force. So in other words, you take some of both. You do heavy things as fast as you can for optimal power. The glacier is very strong, but it's super slow. It can't crack an egg. Practically speaking, who are some of the most powerful possessors in football? Linebackers, fullbacks. Linemen are big, but they're usually slow. Cornerbacks are fast, but they're usually small. The ones that live in the middle, the ones that are bigger than the fast, small people, but faster than the big, slow people. Power lives in the middle. Okay? So in terms of leverage, levers, all we have to do, we're going to make it simple, we're going to keep it simple. Because this stuff can be confusing. But all you have to remember is, what do we need it for? What do we need the leverage for? What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? First classes, where the axis is in the middle, can serve all 4 functions of a simple machine, just not at the same time. So what I mean by that is, the axis is in the middle. Well, if I have 2 forces on each end, I can have the axis closer to one end or closer to the other, and it still technically says axis in the middle. So what do I need? Well, if I'm doing a catapult, I need one end to be super fast. So that means I'm sacrificing torque and force for the advantage of speed. I can't have both of these at the same time. I have to sacrifice one or the other. How many of you have ever, it didn't break, how many of you have ever tried to undo with a wrench, a stuck lug nut, and you're like, ugh. So you might get a longer reach, or we take a pipe. But if you finally unlock it, it takes forever to unscrew it, because although it's going to be very forceful with its torque, it's going to be slow. So once you loosen it up, you say, oh, get out of the way. Do it fast. But you can't do it fast and do it strong. Okay? So my point is, it's all about advantages and disadvantages. If you need balance, you're going to need inverters and everters on each side of the teeter-totter to help keep your balance. You're going to need flexors and extensors on each side of the teeter-totter to help keep you balanced. You're going to need abductors and adductors on each side of the teeter-totter to help keep you balanced. So if you need balance, you're going to need to recruit. Guys, a lot of these muscles can be different things depending on what you need. I'm going to show you these examples. So in other words, on the test, if I say, hey, what type of arrangement would we need for balance? First classes. If you want to change direction, you also need first, because that's the only way. The axis has to be on the middle, because that's the only way we can pull down on one end and the other end go up. Because if the axis, let's say like the elbow, if the axis was here, me pulling up on my bicep makes everything go up. For the tricep, because it's behind the axis, the tricep pulling up makes the arm go down. If you're doing a push down, me pulling the tricep up makes the hand go down. It's a redirection of a force. Hamstrings pulling the pelvis down helps me go up. In other words, it's a key word. I'm going to give you that. I'm going to say, hey, when this muscle pulls you down so that this other part can go up. Does that make sense? And then finally, the speed and force, the trade-off of speed and force, like I just said. Typically, if a muscle inserts far away from the axis, we're going to just use common sense. If this was I'm going to use the scissors. Okay. If I wanted to close these scissors as fast as possible, would I want to pinch them far away from the axis, or would I want to pinch them close? In other words, far away, I got to run a further distance to close it. So the closer a muscle inserts to the axis, the faster it could potentially cause motion if the load is light enough. And the further away a muscle crosses the axis or inserts to the axis, the more torque or force, but it can't do it fast. Think about this. If this was a ladder, just pretend, work with me, this is a ladder. And you know how a ladder has rungs. There's no way, well, maybe, if I attached a rope to the first rung, it would be very hard to raise the ladder up. If I attached it to the last rung, it would be super easy. But if I could produce enough force, let's say we had 5 or 10 people pulling on the rope, if I was able to overcome the resistance, it could flip that ladder over quick, because I'm pulling very close to the axis. But if this thing was super heavy and I inserted it far away, I could bring it up, but it's going to go very slow. But if something's very heavy, who cares if it goes slow? You know the old example of the crowbar, right? When you're trying to pull out nails in the wood, when you use the crowbar to pull, those things are coming out very slow. But who cares? They're coming out. They're moving. The game isn't to make the nails come out fast. It's just to move the nails. So I just want to teach you there's an inherent contraindication between speed and force. And then the last thing you're going to need to know for your test. Usain Bolt, I teased this last class. Usain Bolt can run super fast. So he's going to need a lot of third-class muscles to make his shoulders and hips flex and extend fast. Muscles that insert very close to the axis. Iliopsoas is an example. But Usain Bolt can choose to run slow. Usain Bolt can choose to jog with me. I can't choose to run like Bolt. So what I'm saying is, when you're lifting something heavy, when you're giving max effort, it's going to be slow. So in other words, you need anything and everything that can help you do heavy functional tasks, regardless of if it's far away, closer to, first class, second class, it's all hands on deck. It's any agonist that crosses. It doesn't matter if it's close to, further away, in the middle. If you're doing a max effort or if you're doing something heavy and slow, it doesn't matter. You want everybody. However, if you're doing something fast, only the muscles that have third class or speed functions can help when you go fast. That includes thirds, which will always favor speed because they insert close to the axis, or first that have an advantage in speed. That's the key. Look, guys, it doesn't matter if the axis is right here. This is a fast. But if the axis was here, this is also a fast. Like, it's just semantics. Was the axis here or there? It still gives you the same advantage of pulling close to the axis. The only difference is that in a first, this goes down so the other goes up. This goes up and the other one goes up. But it's still the advantage of speed when it's close to the axis. Second-class muscles are always going to favor torque at the disadvantage of speed. When you're trying to put on the brake, having second-class muscles, muscles that insert far away, are great for braking things. Meaning, the ladder is falling down, and I'm trying to stop it. Do I want to pull close to, or do I want to pull on a rope farther away? Further away is going to help slow it down. So an example, when you're extending your hip and you want to put on the brake, muscles like the rectus is a great braker, but all the muscles can help put on the brake. Last thing I'll tell you, because again, this is just the so what. You need balance first. You need change direction first. You need speed. Anything that's first that can give me speed, and thirds will always give me speed. And if you're doing something heavy, you want everybody to help. It doesn't matter. Anybody that can pull, we want. Here's a cool fun fact. Last class, and I think I was waiting for this muscle to give this example. Last class I talked to you about the gastrocnemius. So in the back of the knee, you have 7 knee flexors. One of them, the gastrocnemius, and let's just talk about the hamstrings because you guys know the hamstrings. The hamstrings cross the knee and insert very close to the knee. The gastroc crosses the knee and then goes all the way down to the hip. So in other words, the hamstrings at the knee, when my knee is open chain, have more of a third-class speed leverage advantage because a small amount of change here can get a sweeping big range of motion at my knee. The gastrocnemius is like pulling on the ladder very far away. So here's the practical so what. If I flex my knee as fast as possible, my gastrocnemius doesn't even contribute. It stays silent. Because it can't contract fast enough to help. It's like my hamstrings are Usain Bolt, and my gastrocnemius is me. And we're going fast. We're sprinting, and I'm like, Usain, have fun. I can't keep up with you. But if we were doing hamstring curls on a machine that required heavy weight, or we were going slow enough, the gastrocnemius is like, now I can run with you. So that's the key. When you're doing really fast movements, second classes and first that favor force may not be able to run with the thirds, may not be able to run with those speed muscles. but they can sure as hell put on the brake, and they can sure as hell contribute when things are slow or require a lot of strength. Yeah, there's so much semantics with levers I just wanted to hit the main points. I posted this graph, the force velocity curve, and then you also have the PowerPoint that I did in Unit 1 to pull up. So look, I'll give you one more example of what I'm trying to say. You see that middle one and you're like, levers in the body, and this is an example of a second class when you define the parts. So what I mean by that is, for the ankle, you're defining the parts and saying, okay, this is the wheel. The metatarsal phalangeal joint is my wheel. And here's the handle. And the gastrocnemius is my hands. And the foot is the wheelbarrow. But I could easily say, well, wait, there's my axis. There's my force. And it's redirecting a force. I'm pulling the heel up so I can push down. And that's a first-class advantage. Just nod if you understand what I'm saying. So because this can all be super confusing based on how you define parts and technically, and well, that's a look how close it is. I'm saying, look, don't worry about that stuff. Just give me the functions based off of the advantages you need. You need balance? You're going to need some first. You need a redirected force? You're going to need some first. You're trying to go fast like Ricky Bobby? So we won't go fast? You need first that give you an advantage of speed, or you need thirds because they're always going to give you the advantage of speed. And the other one is if you're doing something heavy, you want all hands on deck. I don't care if you're a speed muscle. Can you give me something? That little something might be the difference between whether or not I get my max or I don't get my max. So when we're doing forceful contractions, we want everybody that can pull that weight. That's it. That's all you need to know. Cool. Awesome. Now, I got some feedback that we need to do some more practice stuff on length tension questions. Is that cool? Okay. So let's do exactly that. So in other words, I got some feedback from Grace that we're pretty cool on stretching. That we need to do some more agonistic contraction stuff with length tension. Okay. So let's do some examples. Let's start off with this one. The only muscle that you have to consider length tension wise in the ankle and subtalar joint is gastrocnemius. Right? So in other words, all of our other ankle and subtalar joint muscles don't cross the knee. So that's good. So in other words, analyze. So I get very impassioned talking about levers. So for this one, while I pull the screen down, analyze agonist, your group, analyze who would be in that group, and then do a contraction practice left to right and right to left. And then we'll get into the length tension stuff while I try to get this. So also I'll add a type of question I'll ask. I'll say a punter is trying to punt the ball, and that punter is going to contract the knee extensors or the vastus medialis. I'll use one of the quad muscles. And I'll say to try to get the knee to extend as fast as possible to kick the ball. Fast knee extension. that should trigger, third class function. To make the knee go fast, you have to pull close to the knee joint. That kind of stuff. In other words, what do I need is going to tell you the classification that I need to use. Keep it simple. Lord knows, levers can be ridiculous. Semantics, a lot of it is silly semantics. All right, here's the question. Does my knee position matter? Maybe that's a good question to start with. It doesn't. Because none of the muscles, what are my muscles that I'm working? Well, my group. My inverters or my everters? Everters. None of those muscles cross the knee, so they don't care what the knee's doing. I don't care. You could have your leg straight, you could have your knee bent, doesn't matter. Everters, who are the lateral pulling muscles? Extensor digitorum, peroneus tertius, peroneus longus, peroneus brevis. If we're doing contraction, me personally, I bring it back to agonist because it has pull in the name. I need everters, so when I see eversion, it's going to be concentric. I'm using everters, so when I see inversion, it's going to be eccentric.
What is this inversion, eversion, and not eversion? Because it looks like there's nothing moving there to the subtalar, but it's. You see what I mean?
No, absolutely. I should have just picked a better picture. Yeah, not a problem at all.
There's a little bit of use coming off the ground.
No, that's fair. That's fair. Let me see if I can find a better one that just isolates. The answer is it's really hard to not. Like if you just put your foot off of the ground and just try to rotate, it's really hard to not do both of them. So probably what's happening is one of twofold. They're saying, okay, I want you to rotate the knee, but not move your subtalar joint. That's kind of hard to do. Or I want you to move your subtalar joint and not move your knee. That's kind of hard to do. If it was on the test, I would try to find, I just kind of try to pull up something quick, but I would definitely try to find one that highlighted, just what I'm asking. I have to, absolutely. Or the specificity, so let me find a better picture. Or the specificity could be in the answer choices. So in other words, if all of my answer choices were inverters and everters, then you know that I'm asking about the subtalar. But no, that's very fair. Let me try to find a better isolation to the question. Here's one. Here we go. This should be better. Cool. Okay, guys, same question, just a better picture. Just a better picture. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish external force, right? What's the exercise trying to do to me? By seeing what the exercise is trying to do to me, then I can ask myself, well, what muscles do I need to recruit to work against it? Who are those muscles? And then what I do is so follow me here. External force is trying to do one thing. I need this group of muscles to do this other thing. I have a name for them. Those muscles are these. But once I come down to contraction, I want to bring it back here because the agonist has pull in its name and it's easier for me to do my ABC example. In other words, it's hard to say, well, the tibialis, the peroneus tertius does inversion through eccentric. The peroneus tertius does eversion through concentric. it's a heck of a lot easier to say everters do eversion concentrically and everters do inversion eccentrically. Okay? So the external force is trying to invert my subtalar joint, therefore I need everters. My everters are extensor digitorum, proneus tertius, proneus longus, proneus brevis. Those are my eversion pullers. In this exercise, when I see eversion, when I see the motion that those muscles are trying to do, that's going to be concentric work. And when I see the inversion, those muscles will be allowing motion to occur in the opposite direction of their pull. That's going to be eccentric work. Okay, guys, I'm going to use layman's terms to infer motion so that we can practice some different questions. All right, so he's doing this exercise. We're at the ankle. And I could say, what's happening when he brings his heels up? I could ask, what's happening when he lowers his heels down? I could ask, what would be happening? Now, if I did ask the question about what's happening during the plantar flexion or dorsiflexion for, I'm going to have before now. But if I tell you the motion, then there's going to be no sarcastic. I'm just saying, hey, you're going back and forth doing these motions. So I'm telling you what would be happening during the, let me find well, let's start with this one. So for this kind of question, I would say, what would be happening when the heels come up or the heels go down? I would be using those layman's terms. When the heels come up, what motion is going to happen at the ankle? Heels come up. It's plantar flexion. Heels go down. Dorsiflexion. Now, in terms of length tension, there's a certain muscle who is going to have less contribution to this exercise because they are on slack. And in being so, there's going to be other muscles who have to make up that slack. They have to increase their contribution because their buddy is pulling with one hand behind the back. So give that some thought. Who would have less of a contribution as an agonist? And in doing so, the others have to take up that slack. All right, guys, am I working plantar flexors or dorsiflexors? Plantar flexors, those muscles are, just look at your circle, the ones in the back, tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitoris longus, proneus longus brevis, and then we get to soleus and gastroc. Remember, the soleus and gastroc are your primary wheel pushers. Right? It's not that the others don't contribute, it's that those muscles have secondary function like like maintaining your arch or making sure your toes can grip, and by doing so, pulling in a direction of plantar flexion. But if you just look at the muscle, bigger muscles are stronger muscles. So you look at all those ones that we went and saw that were stringy, and then you look at the gastroc, and it's like, all right, those are the ones really propelling my skateboard. Which of those muscles has a lessened contribution because of knee position? Well, lessen. Which one is going to be pulling less because it's on slack? The gastroc. So therefore, which one has to be working? If it's a primary wheel pusher, which muscle will be working more to make up that slack? Soleus. And that's why this exercise emphasizes the soleus muscle. Because the gastroc is on slack, it can't contribute as much to the work. Something's got to make that up. Soleus is like, I got you, dude. I'm the second primary pusher of this here skateboard, and I got you back. That's how it works. So on the test, I might have this picture next to, so how can we make gastroc work to its full potential? What movie was that? Full Potential? Carl. That's a dyslexia. Cold. So if we want gastroc to give its full potential, bless you, we want to extend that knee. Let's see if I can find it, you guys. Okay. I'm always afraid to click on websites. All right. So let's say we do this one, but I'll try not to have highlighted muscles. I'll try to find pictures that don't highlight muscles. Hey, come on. Okay, so first things last. Do you see how for this exercise, we're still working plantar flexors, but now we're taking that gastroc off of slack. So basically we're saying, hey, gastroc, yoink. And so because we're lengthening it here, taking that slack out, it can pull more on the other end. That's all we're doing. And again, it's not to say soleus turns off. It's just, if the gastroc is now pulling with both hands, soleus is like, oh, cool. I don't have to take up your slack anymore. So that's the trick between the standing and the seated calf raise. Is just one, you're putting the gastroc on slack, and the other, you're taking up that slack. Yeah, it's not about it. They're working, and they're both working very hard because they're both yanking on the same string. So your Achilles tendon, the soleus and the gastroc are yanking on that string. But so one way to look at it is, it's not about like assigning a percentage. It's about saying, if I have two muscles yanking on a string, it's like tug of war. It really is. So you and I are pulling on the same tug of war rope. And all of a sudden, for the same load, let's say we're pulling against three kids, and they're pulling their max, right? They're yanking as hard as they can. You and I can sling them across the room at any time, but we want to get paid, so we want to make it. We want them to have fun, right? So we're just like, oh, you got us. if all of a sudden take one hand and let go of the rope, and if we don't want to lose, wouldn't you have to pull more? And it's like, all right, I'm back. It's kind of what's happening. You have the gastrocnemius and the soleus blending into one pull rope at the calcaneus. But when I flex my knee, I take my gastroc. So this is the one common tendon down here, but only the gastroc crosses the knee. So when I flex my knee, I put it on slack. So the soleus, who is unaffected by that, just has to pull more to do the same work. And then when I stand up, I do this. The gastrocnemius increases its pull at the ankle, and the soleus is like, oh, sweet, I don't have to pull as much. So it's not that it turns off, it's just your fluctuating overall contribution based off of intention. And it's not the same, but it should make sense that, like, if I'm trying to stretch my calf in layman's terms, it's the same, it's really the same concept. If I extend my knee and dorsiflex, I'm really going to feel that in my calf, the gastroc. I feel that in the back of my knee. But as soon as I flex my knee, I don't feel that in the back of my knee anymore because my gastroc isn't being stretched as much. And now I might be able to dorsiflex more because now my gastroc isn't holding my dorsiflexion back by being super tight. So that's a different route to explain the concept, that you can have more dorsiflexion when your knee is flexed because your gastrocnemius isn't a limiting factor to how far back you can go. Guys, that's the only length tension question I can ask at the ankle, because that's the only muscle that crosses the knee and the ankle. So, but now, that being said, I can ask it different ways. I'm not talking about Italian or French. Like I might put a standing calf raise next to a seated and say, hey, which one of these would the soleus be a bigger contributor to? Now, I'm never going to say what's on or off because the gastroc is still pulling. It's just not pulling at its full potential because it's on slack. That makes sense? Okay. Okay, let's do, if y'all don't mind, because again, that's literally the only length tension I can't ask at the end is gastroc. So I wanted to try to get in this stretching question. So what to add to our discussion? And again, guys, none of these, it's not my job to tell you how to do things. It's only my job to try to teach you how some of these things work. You're gonna take these ingredients and go be your own chef in your own kitchen, in your own clinics, in your own fitness facilities. I really need to start learning how to do more folders. So on the test, if I asked, hey guys, right ankle, am I doing more of a gastroc or a soleus stretch? And I might ask you why. And the answer choices might be something like gastroc being stretched because the knee is flexed, gastroc being stretched because the hip is flexed. Oh, I might make up some stuff. Soleus is being stretched because the knee is flexed. That kind of stuff. So this would be a good stretch for a soleus and other plantar flexors because you're getting the gastroc out of the way. The gastroc is notorious. So what we do is we say, hey, gastroc, it really is no different than if I'm stretching my hips with my knees locked And I feel that, right? I feel that in my hamstrings. Without moving my hips, if I flex my knees, I lose that stretch immediately. Because I unlock my knees, I put those hamstrings on slack at the knee, I don't feel it anymore. It's those biarticular muscles. I can lengthen it or shorten it at both ends. So what's happening here is this would be more of a soleus stretch because my gastroc is on slack at the knee. Therefore, I can get more dorsiflexion. I can move my ankle more into dorsiflexion, getting the gastroc out the way is a limiting factor, and then other muscles can feel it, could feel that stretch. Because if I didn't, if my knee was straight, if my knee was extended, the end of my range of motion is going to be because of gastroc. Does that make sense? Now, left, knees extended, gastroc. But if you're purposely trying to get other plantar flexors, get that gastroc out the way. That's the lesson. And how do you get it out the way? You put it on slack at the knee. All right. Y'all want some more practice questions? Okay. I'm going to just do some general stuff. How would I stretch the peroneus longus at the, and this is important, the difference between ankle and subtalar, right? Subtalar is the wobble, ankle is the wheel. How would I stretch the peroneus longus at the ankle joint? Do I want a plantar flex or do I want a dorsiflex? Give it some thought. So to answer this question, all you got to do is say, okay, how does it pull at the ankle? And then know that I don't want to move it in the direction of its pull. I want to position the ankle in the opposite direction of its pull. That's what's going to make it lengthen, stretch. So the peroneus longus does what at the ankle? It's a plantar flexor. So I want to make sure I dorsiflex. And to the lesson we just did, I want to make sure my knee is flexed so that that gastroc doesn't stop my motion too soon. What about the peroneus longus at the subtalar joint? Do I want to invert or do I want to evert? Invert. So if it's a combinational muscle, it's a plantar flexor evert. As a, there's levels. You're going to keep leveling up. You're going to keep going down the rabbit hole. You're like, wow, it's a plantar flexor and it's an everter. So if I really want to get it, I want to dorsiflex and invert. That'll stretch it in two different planes. Does that make sense? Give me two functions, one at the ankle, one at the subtalar of the tibialis posterior. And when I say function, that just means how's it pull. In other words, it doesn't matter if it's working or not. The muscle crosses the ankle and crosses the subtalar joint in a way that it pulls in those directions of motion, even at rest. Has anybody ever seen or heard of somebody rupturing their bicep? Horrible injury. But if you rupture your bicep, this muscle pulls up into your arm like a curtain, like you pull the shades of a curtain. In other words, if there's no string tacked down, it's coming up. Why? Because the muscle's always pulling. Muscles always pull. Bless you. So function is just how does it pull? That's the only thing that's consistent. Motion isn't consistent because my bicep can allow the extension or cause the flexion, or it could prevent no motion at all. We can't go on what muscles do based off of motion. But what we can do is what do muscles do based on how they pull? And then understand how that pull can influence motion through contraction. Tibialis posterior, ankle joint, plantar flexor, subtalar joint, inverter. If I were you, I would want 30 questions like that. Because the contractions doesn't matter. It's just how does it pull? Here's another type of question. Tell me what the tibialis anterior and the tibialis posterior have in common. How do they pull the same? What's their common pull? And on the test, I'm going to say both are dorsiflexors, both are plantar flexors, both are everters, both are inverters. I mean, there's only so many things I could put. You know, both are elevators. I mean, make some up. So what do they have in common? They're both inverters. So in other words, if you were doing a subtalar TheraBand exercise and you needed inverters, those two muscles would be like, hey, we can work on the same teeth. That's cool. Because my dorsiflexion pull is going to cancel your plantar flexion pull, and we can work together in the mostly frontal plane to pull in the direction of inversion. That's cool. All right, last question. I'm going to do a practical one. Has anybody ever heard of heel walks in the therapy clinic? Okay, so I'm doing heel walks. All heel walks are keep your toes up while you're walking. And these emphasize certain muscles of my ankle. So I'm doing some heel walks. I'm trying to keep toes up. Would I be working plantar flexors or dorsiflexors as I do my heel walks? Let me give you a visual. So here's the ankle. I have a big foot. The ground is trying to do this. So if I keep my foot up, it kind of makes sense who I want to pull with, right? Do I need plantars or dorsis? Dorsis, great. Now that you know that, you just say, who are my dorsi pull? Tibialis anterior, extensor big toe, hallux, extensor other toes, digitorum, and peroneus tertius. That's how it works. All right, before I let you go, let me go over the plan. So there's no more knowledge. You have everything you need. So what we're going to do is Friday is, I'm going to call it a lab review. I will literally say, hey, trunk, what do y'all want to do? What do you want to talk about? Any questions, clarifications? Pelvis to trunk, pelvis to hips, hips, knees. I will be here to make sure everybody has all your questions answered. If you won't be here, send in your questions and I'll answer. Saturday, I'm leaving to do a benefit auction for a veterans military charity in California. I know. So Monday's review will be via Zoom, but Grace will be in person, just like we did our class. So that's your review. That's last minute. That's taking our review Friday and studying over the weekend and say, hey, I had one last question about this or a clarification. Your exam on Wednesday, my wife, Miss Lucy, who has a bachelor's in exercise science and a master's in exercise science, and she loves this stuff. And she loves me. So she's going to be here proctoring the exam with Grace. So if you have clarification questions, I'm obviously going to be able to call, but I promise I'm going to try to make it as straightforward as possible. The grades are really good. And then I'm going to give you guys a lecture on upper extremity for Friday as I travel back. Grace, you wanted to make an announcement on even more review practice.
Yeah, so I know on the Virgin I was flying in this morning, but yes, let's test this next week. And then normally we do y'all's reviews on Tuesday because 310 has the same test date as y'all, but this time they don't. So I know that there's like a KPA meeting on Tuesday, and some people have already told me to make the Tuesday review at 5:30. So me and Emma have decided that we can also host it on Monday evening at 5:30 if anyone has a conflict on Tuesday. But Monday doesn't work, we'll also be here Tuesday. But it won't be the same review. So if you come Monday, it's going to be the same material on Tuesday. Yeah.
Cool. Are we feeling okay? All right. Yes, ma'am.
Is your wife gonna give us like 5 minutes to go circle before the test starts?
She's much meaner than me. I'm joking. She'll probably give you 30 minutes. Yes, absolutely. I'm very thankful you shared that concern, and I will, in multiple ways, acknowledge and take care of you guys as far as time. You're welcome.